Okay,
All right, we're getting there for
I
sure.
believe we're ready. You let me know when you're ready, Lisa.
All right, fantastic.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. It's still good morning, isn't it? Yes, good morning and welcome. The title of this session is Are You Ready for It? The Impact of NIL Changes on High School Sports Leaders. If you have any questions during the presentation, please write them in the chat or the Q&A box, and we will have some time at the end for Lisa to address your questions. And with that, it is now my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Lisa Miller.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. You might recognize that "Are you ready for it?" kind of "Are you ready for it?" in terms of the Taylor Swift marketing that goes along with all of her success. So, are you all ready for it? We think of many of those strategies to prepare ourselves for something that's coming ahead. How do we best go about it? How do we plan for it? And so our agenda today is to get this introduction, welcome everybody, thinking about our NIL education and sport leaders. What are we thinking about? What have we experienced? We'll also talk a little bit about a digital ethnography methodology. We'll talk a little bit about the mental health considerations. So, what has happened in the time we've been here at the conference? We've heard quite a bit in terms of the NIL. And so, I wanted to try to focus in and adjust my presentation just a little bit to try to focus in on some aspects we haven't heard quite as much about. So I'm looking forward to focusing in more on those mental health considerations, especially. I'll also talk a little bit about our educational services from a sport management perspective, and definitely thinking about investing in our future with the NIL. So for those of you who might be a little newer to the name, image, and likeness, this is a wonderful opportunity for student athletes and athletes in general to be able to brand themselves and make it profitable in terms of how they manage their brand as themselves. So their name, their image, their likeness. If we think of each one of us, and even Taylor Swift, like one of her songs is "Are You Ready for It?" How do we prepare to sell ourselves as professionals, our name, our likeness, our image? When we think of it in those terms, it can be very hopeful, but also a little challenging at times in terms of the pressure with the professionalization of ourselves. So I wanted to look at the management of it, but also the psychology of it. So I utilized an ethnographic approach, which is a really interesting way of collecting information through videos, focus groups. It's kind of a collection of methodologies. We also interviewed parents, coaches, athletic directors, and sports psychology experts, uh, sport management experts, and we're just observing. A big part of the ethnographic approach is cultural. What is this culture of the NIL? Like, what is brewing out there in terms of how parents are feeling about it, how are athletic directors feeling, coaches? We also have, I'm hearing these new approaches to being an NIL advisor or NIL coach. And so what are we observing in this culture? What types of artifacts can we take from this experience? And so we're seeking these cultural patterns, looking for different themes, descriptions, assumptions that are happening out there, and how are we interpreting all that's happening? What will happen within a culture is you start to see themes emerge that tells a little bit about what is the psychology around this particular culture. When we think about very competitive sports, many of us have experiences in competitive sports. We can really get a sense of that deep culture surrounding this, from the pressure, from the values, the beliefs. What behaviors are we recognizing? I love looking into social media, and you have some coaches or some sports psychologists kind of making these silly comparisons of what we are all like in this highly competitive environment, how we take it so seriously. And we have to. That's part of the NIL as well, is it is serious. We are having our own language around all of this. We see rituals that are starting to develop, and these are the pieces of the culture. So what are some findings that came out of all of this? Definitely looking at some pros and cons that go along with it. How are people thinking about it? How are they feeling about it, especially from the sport management or sport leadership side? We can look at, do we feel like we are effectively helping student athletes? Now, as the NIL comes in, we are starting to see a little more pressure on that cons side, like more time commitment, more questions, legal considerations, ethical considerations. And as this environment becomes even more serious than it already was, we start to see some of these psychological challenges, from feeling that pressure to feeling exhaustion to sometimes not knowing which path to take in particular pressure filled situations. Even for coaches, maybe feeling like they need to step back or step away, maybe needing some additional advising or help. On the positive side, we still see a lot of hope and celebration of athletes' success. For example, the signing, there have been some interesting comments around like the signing situations that high schools used to have and how those might change into the future. So on both sides, we have our opportunities, but we also hear a lot of themes of challenges. So what do we do on the psychological side and also on the management side? For sport leaders, we see how many aspects of the NIL connect to our expertise in sport management, from sport law and ethics to sport finance and economic impact. We can think about the different sport events that go into all of this. And then, of course, the human resource side. And I want to emphasize that human side, the human relatedness that goes into all of this, making connections, the communication. So much of it is also connected to this human resources. But then on the mental health and psychological side, on individuals and on the leader, the anxiety and pressure that can happen with all of this. And what we need to know is that one of the findings is that people don't always reach out when they need help. We might know exceptional athletes who need additional help, and they don't quite know how to ask for it, or coaches that are trying to figure out what they should be doing to maximize their athlete opportunities. So they don't always get the help, and they don't always know how to ask for that help. It can get quite complicated. We see many of these biopsychosocial approaches that come into what is going on in this environment, in this culture of NIL, from the physical training to these psychological pieces of, coping skills and social skills and self-esteem. And then you add on top of it the parents and peers. It's so complicated, and we see a lot of weighing down on mental health. that people don't always know how to recognize when there are some challenges there that can also relate to our management and leadership in these areas. So, how can we help? We are starting to think about advisors and coaches in this space and in this culture that can help us help families. We might remember back to the Jerry Maguire movie that help me help you. And with families, they don't always have the support they need. We can see some financial obstacles that can come with different athlete pursuits. And sometimes it's that negative attitude or negative perception about seeking help. We don't always get a lot of support for that important step of seeking help from an advisor or coach or even somebody over in sports psychology. Now, what we want to try to do is create a roadmap. Where do we go from here with these results, knowing that there are both challenges and opportunities, and we're seeing quite a few themes emerge related to the mental health side. And some of these, we know some of the pressure and how do we prepare for that pressure. The highly effective approaches can even go way back. We were in a presentation yesterday with Dr. Freeland and Kevin Carr related to starting early, even in middle school, starting to recognize that talent and starting to develop the skills to understand name, image, and likeness. I don't know about you, but boy, getting young people to understand that you are a brand is really difficult. And then on top of that, you need to take care of this brand, and it could impact a lot of opportunities that are presented to you. Now, also, what we have found is that much more research is needed. We might know some of these short-term benefits, but we don't have that long-term information related to the name, image, and likeness changes yet. But those will be important to collect into the future. Now, on the psychological side, we start thinking about what are these challenges that athletes are likely to endure. The social media abuse, which I saw a wonderful research presentation relating these two with the increase in sports gambling. You see that increase in social media abuse for these young athletes. And even before all of this, I always felt like these are 18 to 22-year-olds, and they just don't have the mental health skills developed in them over time to be able to cope with all of this. And then you add the sports gambling on top of this, the jealousy. I saw a wonderful research interview on ESPN related to abuse coming from family and friends, especially those who are involved in sports gambling, thinking that the athlete owes them because the athlete didn't perform as well as they should have. So you imagine all that pressure that is building up on athletes. And a lot of times athletes think they can handle it until they're getting death threats or, we might have a bolstering of self-image and self-ego when we go into these types of wonderful opportunities. But then to see that there is a lot of criticism, and it can be very scary, especially when one of the findings in the ESPN research was the violent threats that can happen when people are anonymous. So it can be very scary and it can be very pressure filled. So how can we help? And we think of this from the mental health side. There are so many choices in terms of gaining more expertise from the leadership side, helping athletes with their accountability tracking. If you want to do these different goals related to your name, image, and likeness, how can we help you gain responsibility that is even beyond your age? Because that's part of what these athletes undergo, is having to be responsible beyond their age and having to be wise beyond where they currently are. And we can help with that from the sport leadership perspective. Sometimes it comes down to acceptance and commitment. We heard a wonderful presentation yesterday about the importance of taking these types of situations seriously, making a commitment and accepting the responsibilities that go along with that commitment. Now, what we also want to keep in mind from a mental health and sports psychology perspective is we don't have to accept the abuse. That we want to help athletes know how to manage that, because that can be very draining and very disappointing, and sometimes drive athletes away from what they love and their greatest passion over time. So looking at these cognitions, behaviors, getting a sense of how athletes are coping with these different dynamics, family dynamics is a whole other challenge. And I have I have many years of coaching, and I have witnessed my share of, I never thought I would. As a young coach, I thought, oh, I'll be fine. But you definitely see the family dynamics that can start to surface with all the competitiveness. We also think about the feminist perspective as we look at women's sports and how we're seeing a lot of positive change, but then uh, some uh, some challenges to mental health as well. And then we think about the humanistic perspective. How are student athletes being treated with kindness, especially from coaches in these environments that can be highly competitive, but also that social support. The athlete needs both sides, that kind, loving social support that athletes will need when they are going through these highly ambitious, highly competitive cultures. So that good balance is really important in developing in them their interpersonal skills of reaching out to their social support system, building that social support, because they will need those connections to their athletic directors, their advisors, their teachers, family members, and all of the huge amount of people who are connected to this process with name, image, and likeness, the branding of oneself. We can also think about developing those mindfulness skills in athletes to know and self-assess, like, how am I feeling? What do I need? Am I getting the rest I need? Am I obsessing? We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. How am I doing that mindfulness of the moment? And sometimes just having the opportunity to savor. This is a wonderful month of November to have a lot of gratitude and savoring. That's also one of Taylor Swift's strategies with branding, is giving a lot of thanks and thanking our fans out there, thanking our helpers, even thanking our critics at times for giving us that important feedback. And the networking, we see how important networking skills are as opportunities, sponsorships come into these student athletes, and focusing in on their strengths. They will have plenty of opportunities to be criticized, to be finding all of their flaws, but can we also focus in on their strengths? So some of this is cognitive restructuring, helping athletes recognize, are they having some irrational thoughts around this culture and environment? Making sure that they're taking time off, making sure that they're taking care of themselves, checking in on their emotions. Are they staying engaged? Is this remaining meaningful to them? And do they have some way of looking at these achievements, maybe even some measures of how they're doing in this space and in this culture? And sometimes it's combining all of this, making sure we're doing a wellness check-in. I love to see teams that have wellness check-ins. Are you sleeping enough? Are you eating enough? Are you taking time with your friends and family? Just taking care of the whole athlete in these different situations. So the cognitive restructuring, we can take a look at what is that thought? Is this something where we see athletes saying, this is too much for me to handle? How are their emotions based on those thoughts? And then how are those impacting the behaviors we end up seeing from athletes in these spaces? Are they going to flourish, or are they setting themselves up for failure through self-fulfilling prophecies of these negative thought patterns and the resulting consequences of negative emotions? I can't handle the pressure might be something that athletes are saying to themselves. And we can either see a rebound there of, okay, yes, I can't handle this pressure right now, but can I find some way to reinvent, rejuvenate hope? Or are athletes going to fall into deeper sadness, which has an impact on their behaviors, whether they're able to fully tap into their potential with these athletic opportunities? We might also think about approaches through exposure therapy. And this can help us just get a sense of, what are we afraid of? Is it that athletes are afraid they're going to fail? Are they afraid? And also with coaches and sport leaders, what are their greatest fears here? Do they think there's some kind of legal trouble that could happen? Are they having a hard time handling the pressure of parents or of athletes themselves? I have both right now in a team that I'm volunteering to help, which is a competitive travel team. And I have parents who are sending out a lot of pressure. And then I have the athletes themselves, like pushing the envelope from my perspective. So we can see a lot of fears that can start to develop here. Am I letting people down? Do I know what I'm doing? What fears stand out to athletes, to sport leaders in this space? Now, another topic that came out is obsessions. My parents are getting obsessed with this. I find myself spending all sorts of time with this. So what are those student athletes and coaches saying? And how can coaches and sport leaders recognize when it's getting to an unhealthy place? There are some theoretical perspectives that compare kind of a healthy obsession, kind of a passionate obsession, versus kind of an unhealthy obsession that starts to happen when we are very passionate, but are we harming ourselves with that passion, creating more anxiety, compulsions? How are we getting relief with all of that? We can find some healthy ways to cope with it. Social support is so important. Gaining more education. Do we have our advisory brain trust? I always like to recommend, that go-to group of people who are there to help you, here to support you. And do you have that support group? Even as coaches or athletic directors, do we have a group of people who are talking about this? Can we connect in that conversation with what we would like to know? And sometimes it's just for sports psychology, connecting people to some of these really healthy, like all of us here in the conference, like, ooh, we might need a minute just to take a deep breath, step back. Do we have these momentary ways of regaining our mental health and finding that core of us And sometimes we have to take a step back from that pressure and just kind of find our go-to strategies that help us get through, whether it's the abusiveness that can come out of this, the challenges of having failures, the gambling that goes along with it. Uh, so looking in at this of how it can become very obsessive for some athletes, and the hours of coaches and athletes ruminating over flaws and enhancements, how can we help them find these healthy boundaries? At my alma mater, Ohio State University, I'm on my scarlet and gray today. We had a past coach who wrote a book about that obsessiveness. You just cannot put in enough hours. There's not enough hours in the day to find those just little enhancements that could mean the difference between beating Michigan or having all that failure fall upon you. There's just not enough time in the day, and that obsessiveness can drive us to some really unhealthy behaviors of drinking or drug use or abusiveness with our families or neglect. We've heard some themes of that throughout our time here at the conference. And thank you to many of you who also presented and provided us with that insight of starting to think about these deeper issues and detecting the problems early so that we can get that good help in these different circumstances. In some cases, it even starts to relate to some of these post-traumatic stress issues. And I like the military simulation perspective when we can start to see, and I see our moderator coming on, so I know I'm getting close to my time here, with simulations for training. Even we've seen some excellent presentations related to artificial intelligence, using that as well to put athletes in these types of simulations to help them. So is there some hope ahead? We do have training out there. We do have additional education and development, and even looking at ways that this can all improve over time. It is meaningful work, and we can help student athletes in so many ways. So in summary, unfortunately, a lot of athletes and a lot of sport leaders struggle in this space, but don't ask for help. So can we watch for those situations where we can add some help through these various methods? Thank you so much, everybody. And do we have time for questions?
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Well, I was giving you a couple more minutes because we kind of got a little bit of a late start, but what an excellent presentation. Especially the cognitive restructuring and remembering the intense pressure that some of these athletes are under. I don't see any questions, and so I'll have to end by yelling. I wanted to yell out OH when you told us
Ohio,
as a
yes.
fellow Ohioan here.
Woo, Buckeyes, yes.
But thank
You
you
know
all
they
for
have pressure.
attending. Yes, thank you all for attending, and thank you for this excellent presentation. And it looks like the next session starts at 12:20. So everybody take a little 10-minute break, and we'll see you at the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.